Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And not for the first time, I find myself cursing Nick Ferrari this morning because we had an absolutely dizzying array of stories ready for your delectation. And then his almost supernatural ability to spot a good phone-in topic. That Travelodge story at the end of his programme there is absolutely fascinating, because imagine if they'd checked in and there had been something dodgy going on and the hotel hadn't reported it. Then I possibly would have... Anyway, we may find time to return to that. I hope we do. We will definitely be talking to Alex Renton later in the programme. There is a documentary going out on ITV tonight in which he not only revisits his own abuse at private school, but looks at the way collusion and cover-up have conspired to ensure that many, many, many similar crimes have and continue to go unpunished. We're going to look at why Theresa May feels the need for a year-long review of the excessive cost of British university education. It's almost as if it was a different Theresa May who was in every cabinet since 2010. What were tuition fees in 2010? About £3,000? First thing the coalition did was triple them, and now we're having a year-long review undertaken by someone who was in that cabinet into working out why university education is so expensive. You couldn't make it up. You don't have to make it up. We haven't even mentioned Brexit yet. And some of the other stuff that I will hopefully be able to put before you today, time permitting, includes... we've got the universities, the story, and we begin with the story that was on the front page of the Mail on Sunday yesterday. A very, very powerful piece of journalism involving the widower of the murdered Labour MP Jo Cox. And I'm going to put a slightly personal slant on this, if I may. I hope it doesn't bore you. But, you know, I've been a little bit under the weather. It hasn't stopped me from checking in on social media. And almost immediately that story started appearing. You get strange, and I know that the kind of weirdest corners of social media, we shouldn't use them in any way to extrapolate or generalise the broader truth. And obviously I get slightly more attention from slightly weirder people than most in those sort of forums. But it's not confined to me, I've checked. The idea that because Brendan Cox's message of being opposed to racism and extremism and the fact that his wife was murdered by a white supremacist terrorist somehow polarises a country. This still surprises me. I'd have thought that we were all on the other side of whatever fence it was from white supremacist terrorists, but apparently not. And so I get loads of stuff saying, oh yeah, I bet you won't be talking about this like you talk about Donald Trump, or, oh yeah, I bet you won't be talking about this like you talk about the President's Club, and I bet you won't be talking... If it was one or two, you'd sort of think, oh well, yeah, jog on. But there is, and we've talked about it so much together on the programme, this incredibly weird belief that everybody will judge allegations of a certain nature, in this case sexual, according to their own affiliations, their own background. How many times have I said to you that if we could show the same interest in children being abused by football coaches, priests and private school teachers that a certain type of person seems to show in Muslim taxi drivers, then we probably could have wiped out paedophilia from this country 20 years ago. And you know, that's not an exaggeration or even a misrepresentation. You can dip your toe into the shallowest corners of public discourse and see people who have never expressed a negative view about anybody from Jimmy Savile right through to the Vatican, absolutely obsessed by the grooming gangs in the north of England because they are made up mostly of Asian men with a Muslim background, almost as if a brown paedophile is bad, but a white paedophile is okay. And you look at that, if you're made in a vaguely sensible way, as I hope I am, and you try and unravel it in a way that doesn't lead you to the conclusion that it is just racism. And it can't be just racism, because you then end up with a story like this today. You end up with a sense from the same people who think that a paedophile is worse if they're brown than they are if they're white, who presume that somebody like me is going to have a problem condemning or castigating Brendan Cox for the behaviour that he has admitted to, with the caveat that some of the viler allegations against him he still denies. And I can't treat you like a therapist or a psychologist, not every day anyway. You'd start charging me instead of the other way around. The question becomes, is it just that you think everybody must be like you? So if you look at a story about, for example, the football coach who was convicted last week of so many crimes against young boys, I lost count, Barry Bennell, And you look at the public pronouncements and the social media outpourings of people who are obsessed about the grooming gangs in the north of England. They've got absolutely nothing to say about Barry Burnell. You know, Gary Speed, the former Wales manager, is dead probably because he was abused by that man. Not a word, not a sausage. Grooming gangs in the north of England involving brown people. Oh my God, it's the end of civilization as we know it. We've got to stop all immigration and leave the European Union immediately. And you can sit and stare at these stories for a very long time in the hope that a little bit of enlightenment might emerge, or a little bit of clarity that doesn't paint your fellow man in an ugly way. It's not happening for me. So I don't know if this is too self-referential. If it is, then we can expand and move the story along like we always do on this programme. It's entirely up to you which direction the conversations go in, even though I guess during the interminable introductions it sometimes seems the other way round. Why would anybody think that somebody of an anti-racist or liberal disposition would be slow to condemn Brendan Cox for his sex pest behaviour? The stuff he's admitted to. Never mind the stuff that is still merely in the realm of allegation. That's the question I want. And you can answer that from any angle you want. You can answer it from my side of this weird fence, this weird invisible fence, where you sort of say, well, look, I mean, Brendan Cox stands accused of grabbing a woman by the throat. That's disgusting, right? Donald Trump boasts about grabbing women by the vagina. He boasts about it. That's also disgusting. For my money, I think it's probably worse. But in a sense, I suppose you could argue, well, at least he's honest about being a sex pest. At least he's honest about being a sex offender. Brendan Cox wriggled and denied and tried to avoid responsibility. That makes him worse. I don't know that I'd agree with that. I'm just trying to imagine what goes on in the mind of people on the other side of this invisible fence. Is it, and this is a starter for 10, and it's provocative, obviously, but it's not gratuitously provocative. It's the best explanation I currently have. So that's your paradigm, okay? Is it because you have put so much effort into defending Donald Trump, or the other fellow? What was the other guy who was accused of Roy Moore, who was running for the Senate, and a lot of Donald Trump supporters were queuing up to defend him when he was accused of child abuse, accused of sexual relations with underage girls. Because whatever it is that Trump offers to people, or that brand of right-wing politics, and it looks like an endorsement of racism, but it might be a little subtler than that. It might be a little more complicated. Is it because they get so much from that? It's so nourishing. It's such an enormous relief to have these kind of buried prejudices endorsed that you will forgive these men anything. You know, accused of rape by his own wife, paying off porn stars, his own lawyer. I get countless women accusing him of sexual assault and worse. But you don't mind about that. They don't mind about that because what they've been given is so valuable, and people like me can never understand the value of being told that it's okay to be racist again. And then when somebody comes along like Brendan Cox, who is very much became, after his wife's murder, very much became a poster boy for anti-racist feelings. This is all I've got, and I'm happy to be completely wrong about it, but it seems to me that if you are murdered by a racist for racist reasons, then people who feel anything other than compassion and sorrow for you must in some way be a little bit sympathetic to the reasons behind his murder. So that's how I tie the two together. It's just me sort of groping around in the dark at the moment. But you stick up for Roy Moore. They stick up for Donald Trump. They stick up for the, I don't know, the rich men at the President's Club. But when somebody like me, who is publicly, professionally and profoundly opposed to bigotry and prejudice, and I invited Brendan Cox into the studio on 2 or 3 occasions and admired some of the work, much of the work that he was doing, endorsed all of it, why would I possibly hesitate to judge him by the same standards that I would judge Donald Trump by, or Roy Moore, or I mean, who are the kind of British right-wing equivalents? Have we got any British right-wing equivalents of this? Like, off the top of my head, Harvey Weinstein's not British, but do you see what I mean? So the queue on not just on social media, but all over the media. This enormous queue of people saying, oh, yes, bias, hypocrisy, they won't be doing this, they won't be doing that. Is this some form of psychological projection? So have we now got a population on both sides of the Atlantic, but we'll try and focus our attention on this side. We've just got this thing where, well, I have ended up, because of my politics, and we don't have to call it racism necessarily, although it's hard to see what else ties together the Joe Cox story with the Donald Trump support. Is it because your racism, your politics is so toxic, you've ended up defending someone who boasts about being a sex offender? You've ended up giving a free pass to men who have been accused of paedophilia. You have ended up being so hypnotized by the temptation of toxicity that you've done lots of things you never thought you'd do. You're calling it locker room talk when a man essentially lionizes sexual assault. You've debased yourself so completely because you are, I guess, prioritizing the prejudice so much. It's so powerful to be given this free pass to be vile and racist again that you've surrendered everything else that resembles a moral compass. You're thinking to yourself, have become a man who defends people accused of paedophilia. I have become a man who listens to a tape of a reality television star boasting about sexually assaulting women, and I've become a person who describes it as locker room talk. I've become a person who sees a long list of accusations and allegations made against a politician whose prejudices I share, but I've become a person that now dismisses those allegations. I pretend that I care about children being abused in the north of England, but I don't really. I just care about the colour of the abusers. And because deep, deep, deep down inside, you're aware of what you've become, you have to believe that everybody else is the same as you. Is that what we're looking at here? Some bizarre and complicated psychological projection, which means that on a day like today, you have to believe that somebody who is opposed to white supremacists, somebody who finds the murder of Joe Cox to be probably the worst crime committed in this country in political terms, in living memory, somebody who passionately opposes the abuse of women, the normalizing of sexual assault, the rape culture in which many people argue that we live. And then you take a bloke like Brendan Cox, who had become a poster boy, if you will, for tolerance, and yet at the same time had these dark secrets that he must have been keeping while he sat in this studio. And it just makes me actually judge him more harshly. Why would you think that someone like me would throw a bone to someone like him because we feel the same way about racism? Answer: well, because people like you throw enormous bones every single day to people like Donald Trump and Roy Moore because you feel the same way about racism. I was not expecting that to pop out at the end of the introduction. A genuine nutshell there, because I am, and here's one already. Bill has tweeted to say, James is upset because he backed the wrong horse. We're talking about allegations of sexual abuse, Bill. There's no horse in this. You're either in favour of it or you're opposed to it. So when I look at people defending Donald Trump and his self-confessed sexual assault, let alone the catalogue of allegations that are made against him, and I don't get it, because I thought we were all on the same side when it came to sexual abuse and similar behaviours. But obviously we're not, because loads and loads of people defend him. And the same people then queue up to say that people like me will defend Brendan Cox today, which obviously I'm not even going to begin to do. But the fact that people believe that merits closer examination. We've examined it quite closely, and the answer is really, really simple. Unless you can persuade me otherwise, if you have decided to overlook, forgive, describe as locker room talk, ignore countless allegations of sexual abuse because of somebody's attitude to racism that you like, you presume that somebody like me, who shares Brendan Cox's attitude to racism, i.e. it's pretty awful, although thank God my wife hasn't been murdered by a white supremacist, his has, I will now give him a free pass on all of this stuff because we have the same view on racism. So if you've got the same view on racism that Donald Trump and Roy Moore have, you don't care about all the allegations of paedophilia and sexual abuse that have been made against them, and you presume that I'm the same. You presume that I don't care about allegations of sexual abuse or whatever made by people who seem to be on the same side of the racism debate to me. I think we need to choose a new topic now. I've solved it. There's nothing else to say, is there? Well, let's find out. Mel's in Hayward Heath. Mel, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Yeah, well, I'm part of a minority community. I'm transgender. And the problem is that as a transgender woman, we get blamed for sexual abuse, and we get told that we are sexual abusers all the time, whether or not it's true. And a lot of the time it's not. It's come up a lot in the bathroom debate recently. It's come up a lot in schools,
But this is going to sound perhaps a little unkind, but we're not having any of those debates at the moment. Can we just move briefly along to the one that we are having?
Well, the one about Joe Cox's husband, yeah. Well, my point was that it's not okay to turn around and say that he does this good thing and he does that good thing, and therefore there's a balance sheet. We need to think about.
No, but again, nobody's saying that. We're trying to work out why people who defend Donald Trump and Roy Moore would presume that anti-racists are going to defend Brendan Cox against accusations and allegations like this. What is the reasoning in their mind?
That's very simple. It's cognitive dissonance. It's a very basic scientific fact that we do not like change. It's difficult for us to do, and some people are capable of it, and some people are not, and it's a great shame when they're not, and it's a real problem for society, and we need to work on ways to get past this dissonance that we feel. But at the end of the day, they are fundamentally defending an indefensible position.
You haven't really answered my question, and I appreciate I'm sounding a little brusque, but it's fairly hefty territory, this, and I want to get as deep into it as I can. So here is somebody who, for example, here's the catalogue of accusations made against Donald Trump, including, of course, the one of rape that's been made against him by one of his ex-wives, listens to the tape of him boasting about grabbing women by the genitals and saying that he can do whatever he wants to them, passes it off, continues to support this man, continues to lionize him, to admire him, describes it perhaps as locker room talk, and similarly, then, you have the Roy Moore candidacy in America, a man accused of serial paedophilia, standing up, seeking public office, getting endorsements from across America and even from some people on this side of the Atlantic. And because they have, if you like, parked their disapproval of this kind of behaviour in favour of someone who shares their view on racism, because I can't see what else they offer, they presume that people who are passionately opposed to racism will give a free pass to somebody like Brendan Cox when he's accused of sexual impropriety, of being a sex pest. Is that cognitive dissonance? Isn't that just projection? That's just presuming that everybody else must be as morally corrupt as you are.
No, I think it's cognitive dissonance. I think it's easier to accept that it's difficult to prove allegations of sexual it's difficult to prove those allegations, and therefore they find it easy to.
But nothing's been proved against Brendan Cox, and yet people are queuing up to say that people like me will not criticise him or condemn him because hypocrisy and lefties and liberals and what. I just don't get it. In their head, why would I not do it? Answer, because you have the same attitude to racism that he has, and the reason why I don't condemn Donald Trump and Roy Moore is because they have the same attitude to racism that I have.
I would agree with you there. I think it's very much a case of they share beliefs, and it's much easier to ignore someone else's belief that you don't agree with than it is to change your belief.
It's such a biggie. Prejudice, racism, bigotry, white supremacism, it's such a biggie that actually if somebody is standing up and waving your flag, your Confederate flag, you'll forgive them absolutely anything. You could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they'd still be on your side. Thank you, Mel. I'm sorry if I was a little curt. I want to get as many voices on this as possible because I feel we've nailed it. But as ever with a box fresh theory or a box fresh paradigm, they are often the ones that are most susceptible to change and possibly even rebuttal. Dave's in Kingston. Dave, what do you think's going on here? Am I being too personal? I don't want to over-personalise it, but I'm just using myself as a totem, if you like, of liberal values. People saying, oh, the liberals won't condemn this guy. And you go, well, why on earth not? Well, answer, well, we didn't condemn the sex offenders on our side because we like what they've got to say about race.
You're exactly right. They're thinking, this is how my brain works, so that must be how everybody else's brain works as well. That's how James's mind works, so that must be what he's going to do. Absolutely. It's a psychological phenomenon called splitting, and it's something which is common in people with underdeveloped personalities, often in the cluster B personality disorders. So what they do is they divide people up into goodies and baddies, and any of these baddies, whatever wrong things they do, they trivialise them, they ignore them, or they justify them, and any of the people who they consider to be their friends. So sorry, this is what they do to people that they consider to be the goodies, and the baddies. They can't do anything right. So
it's the ultimate kind of footballification of complicated issues and theory.
It's tribalism, and the reason that you're getting this from racists is because that's exactly how races work. That's how racism works, isn't it? They divide things up between goodies and baddies, between our race is superior to your race. So it's easy to demonise, to dehumanise groups of people.
And then you pull out that tape of Trump boasting about grabbing women by the genitals, and you can hear that, and still now send me a text saying, but Trump hasn't admitted anything. Trump hasn't admitted anything. It's not the same thing at all. You can show them the affidavits from various people alleging appalling abuses and assaults, and they can say, but he hasn't admitted it. So if you deny and deceive, you can still be a hero to these people, whereas if you acknowledge and admit, you would become a villain immediately.
Yeah, if you want a glimpse into their minds, you really have to see things in like a kind of pantomime situation, where on one side are all the goodies, on the other side are all the baddies, and it really doesn't matter what the goodies do. If they do anything bad, it's just never seen as bad.
No, I get that, and that takes us to the Fifth Avenue comment, doesn't it? I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, and these people would still love me, because Trump he understands these poor souls better than they understand themselves. But it must happen on the other side as well. I mean, there were perhaps some Labour MPs yesterday, and I know we're comparing apples with eggs, because Cox has both withdrawn from public life and admitted to some wrongdoing, although he's not admitted to all of it. So he automatically becomes different from a Roy Moore or a Donald Trump, because he's put his hands up and said yes. But some Labour MPs perhaps didn't condemn him as strongly as they would have done if he'd been on the other side of the political divide?
Yeah, it definitely can happen, but especially in politics, and it can happen to almost all of us when it comes to things like war. We're much quicker to count our own dead, aren't we, than the dead of the people that our country may be invading.
This is, again, I mean, and I worry that I'm oversimplifying it when I bring it all down to race. But what else do people like Roy Moore and Donald Trump offer their fans that is so intoxicating to them, so powerful to them, that they can overlook these sort of allegations? Whereas people on the Liberal side, I would argue, I feel more let down by Brendan Cox as someone who sympathises with his attitude to racism and extremism for the most obvious of reasons. I feel more let down by him than I would do if someone who's always been unpleasant emerged as having done unpleasant things in the past.
Well, these people hold up their reality. They're the structure of their reality. So it really doesn't matter what they do wrong, because they can't have that structures. They can't have the foundation shaken, which is why the more they do wrong, the more they support them, because they support their twisted ideology.
Fake news.
Exactly.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a home educator. I'm a full-time dad.
How many years before the kids start ringing me?
Yeah, she's interested in ringing you.
I'm not surprised. I look forward to it. James Felton suggests that myself and the last caller, David, have cracked it, so it's time to change the topic. I suspect you may not be on the side of a unanimous decision on that one. The question we're asking is a strangely personal one, but I think sometimes you have to accept the personal elements of stories, as this programme assumes an ever higher profile, and the causes that we back assume an ever higher resonance. We invited Brendan Cox into the studio on 2, I think, occasions, possibly 3, and will continue to support the charities that he set up in the memory of his late wife. He has, however, resigned from those charities, after the Mail on Sunday did an outstanding job, journalistically speaking, of examining old allegations and accusations of sexual impropriety on his part. He has coughed, if you will, confessed, admitted to having been a sex pest, according to the front page of the Mail on Sunday yesterday. The only newspaper that is launching a defence of him today, I wonder if anyone can work out why. If you listen to this programme on a regular basis, you'll be able to guess. If you don't listen to this programme on a regular basis, you'll think I'm making this up. Only newspaper to launch a defence of Brendan Cox today? Go on. The Daily Mail. What? haven't got time to explain. but that's just true. Amanda Platel's written a very emotional column about her friend and why he deserves a second chance and all that sort of thing. I don't think he does. I think he needs to look after his children and stay out of the public eye for the rest of his life. Even if the worst allegation turns out not to be true, the one about him accosting a woman outside a wine bar, putting his thumb in her mouth and similar behaviour, for me, that's game over. But for me, boasting about grabbing women by the vaginas is game over. Getting caught on tape doing stuff considerably, or confessing to doing stuff considerably worse than anything Brendan Cox has been accused of, that's game over. I see the two the same. I don't look at the grooming scandals in the north of England and feel any differently from how I feel about the scandals still emerging from private schools up and down this country, from the Barry Bennell case last week involving young football players being abused on an industrial scale. I don't understand people who feel differently about that. If Barry Bennell had been brown, you think his victims would have been more traumatised, more upset? If he'd been a Muslim, you think his crimes would have been more egregious? So I turn on social media on a day like yesterday and get bombarded with, I presume that some of them are real people, saying, oh, well, you won't talk about this, you won't condemn that. And I try to work out why. How could anybody think that somebody like me, a passionate enemy of child sex abuse, a passionate campaigner against it, and someone who believes absolutely, completely in the existence of rape culture and the weaponization of misogyny, why on earth wouldn't I condemn Brendan Cox? People queuing up to tell me, you won't do this, you're a hypocrite, you won't do that. And even people brought Toby Young into it. This is how mad my life can get at times. I promise you, I had double-figure tweets saying, oh, well, James O'Brien was really rude about Toby Young. He really went in hard on Toby Young. I bet he lays off Brendan Cox, the flipping hypocrite. And I'm thinking, mate, there is so much I say on this radio show that you could criticise me for. You really don't have to start criticising me for stuff I haven't said. Now, wait and see if I say it, then have a pop. I bet he does this, and if he does, he'll be an absolute wrong'un. So the description of how Brendan Cox has behaved, and some of the other stuff I'm hearing from people associated with places that he's worked and charities that he's worked in, it's gross. It's just gross. There's no debate. There's no side to pick. You're either on the side of sex pests or you're against them, if you look at the world through eyes like mine. But if you look at the world through eyes like those of the people who think that there won't be condemnation or criticism, then something different is happening. And I've worked out what it is. And this is obviously going to make already tiny brains explode. What it is you have acknowledged your own moral corruption. You will describe Donald Trump, his behaviour. You'll make excuses for it. You'll ignore the countless allegations and accusations against him. You'll pass it off. He knows you will. He said you would. He said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and you'd still like him because he's allowed you to be racist again. And Brendan Cox's attitude to racism, being very similar to mine, makes you think that I won't be able to condemn him because I must be as morally corrupt as you are. Bad news, guys. I'm not. John's in Edinburgh. John, what's going on?
Hi. I think looking at it over the years, we've seen social media, mainstream media, all media, politicians, everybody saying this, we have to take a position. So we have a situation which is highly divisive in Britain. We have a situation where it's us and them. You're either one of us or one of them. You're Man United or you're Arsenal or you're Chelsea or you're Arsenal or you're black or white or you're right or, it goes on and on. And to colour, if you're black, and so on and so on. It also gets the final part of it. It says, look, if I'm right, by definition, you have to be wrong. Okay?
Yes. This is what I call the footballification of things.
Oh, absolutely. You just happen to be sitting at the same end as Brendan Cox in the Arsenal end, or whoever team you support. You happen to be sitting in the same stand, but you're one of them, or you're one of us.
Yeah.
If you're one of us, that's cool.
And that's why, even if, there's video footage of the bloke having his leg broken, you'll swear blind it wasn't a foul because of the colour of the shirt that he's wearing.
Well, absolutely. You've been told not to be interested in these things. You've been told to be only interested in the black or the white.
Really? No one's told me to be like that.
You're not to be told to be interested. No, the people who are accusing you of not wanting to defend or to defend Brendan Cox, they're the ones that are sort of saying they don't even know there's a grey bit in the middle.
Right.
That's the interesting bit.
And what is the fence over which we're divided? Because I've reached for racism because it seems to me that Brendan Cox is very much a figure, and I wouldn't have wished this upon him because of the circumstances in which the situation arose. He has become the polar opposite, if you will, of the man that murdered his wife. The man that murdered his wife was a white supremacist terrorist. So Brendan Cox has become a totem for people who are passionately opposed to white supremacism. And I guess you then get led to the very uncomfortable conclusion that people... Well, you know what I'm thinking, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't know where it leads to. I mean, you could get into all sorts of conspiracy and say, look, the biggest issue in Britain that makes us the most unequal society, or one of the most unequal societies in the world, is class. Now, it's much better if we have lots and lots of other black and whites to think about, like Celtic and Rangers or Man United and Chelsea and so on and so forth, that we don't even discuss the thing that makes us an incredibly unequal society.
So I will go down screaming about brown child abusers in Rotherham, but I haven't got a single word to say about priests, public school teachers, or football coaches.
Oh no, because you've already been decided. It's already been decided you're one of them, or one of us.
And they are dividing only along racial lines, though.
Oh no, not at all. Oh no.
Well, in the context of the conversations we've been having, they are. What does Donald Trump offer to these people that makes them give him a free pass on all of the allegations of sexual assault and rape? And indeed the boasting about the sexual assaults. What does he offer them?
Okay.
Just membership, belonging.
Indeed. What about if I'm a salesman for Omo and Parcel? Okay.
My dad used to say Omo. I don't think it exists anymore, John.
Whatever.
Go on.
Okay. Omo and Parcel. And I turn around to you and say, you can have Omo or you can have Parcel. And you say, but hold on, what about this eco one across here or this one across here or locally produced and so on? So, oh, no. Look, I'm telling you, the ads are telling you that the only really thing you can have is Omo and Parcel. Now, if I can control you into Omo and Parcel, I can then control people into believing that they are the only two alternatives. Like, for the sake of arguments in Britain, the only two alternatives are Labour and Tory.
But Parcel playing this game as well, because that's the bit I don't get. Omo are telling me
to buy either of those,
to
the exclusion of everything else, okay, you then become a Parcel person. I hope. Because your dad was an Omo person.
Yes.
I don't know.
And that's it. I mean, and that's why so much of it feels like sport at the moment, that it doesn't really matter what you do or who you are. It's all about the colour of your shirt. Just for the record, Dad always used to say, it says Omo on the side of buses, son, but it doesn't mean they sell it inside, when I was perhaps going through one of my many naive phases. Somebody with a functioning intellect and a clear conscience, Caroline tweets, I must now admit I've had Brendan Cox on a pedestal since the brutal murder of his wife. He displayed all the qualities I admire in a husband, father and campaigner. Hence, I feel more betrayed. Sadly, I've ceased to be shocked by how so many people are so immune to Trump's shameful conduct. And that to me, is the point. And yet, everywhere you go, and not just social media, everywhere you go, except the Daily Mail, who are defending Brendan Cox today. I'll leave you to work that one out for yourself. Everywhere you go, you will find people saying, wow, the Liberals won't condemn him. And you can't genuinely work out why anyone would think that. There are some Labour MPs, Jess Phillips is taking some criticism, for essentially saying, I think he's done the right thing by admitting wrongdoing and standing down. I don't know what the wrong thing would be. Do you see what I mean? What do you want it to say? That he should have denied everything and carried on like your heroes do? It's just bizarre until the penny drops. And once the penny's dropped, I don't think there's any picking it up again. Here is somebody in public life who I agree with about racism. I'm a massive racist, and so is he, so I don't care if he's been accused of raping people, sexually assaulting them, and being a paedophile, looking over the Atlantic to Donald Trump and Roy Moore. I don't care about any of that, because he makes me feel cool about being a massive racist. Someone like me looks at someone like Brendan Cox and sees someone embarked for the most obvious and pure of reasons on an anti-racist crusade, because his wife got murdered by one. And you think, oh, well, you'll excuse his behaviour, you'll excuse his sexual impropriety because he's on your side of the racism debate. Have you got a better explanation of that? Because I don't think you have. I don't think anyone has. Jack's in Barnet. Jack, what would you like to say?
I think it's an interesting dilemma that we're in, that we live in such a divisive culture now that's born out of a pessimism in terms of the media reporting that means that we can't actually accept when our side do something wrong because we're so against the other side.
Can I pause you there? Because oddly, the whole point of the last 50 minutes has been me espousing the opposite to that position. It's been me saying Barry Bennell is disgusting. What Brendan Cox has done is gross. What Donald Trump has boasted about is vile. What Roy Moore is accused of is utterly sick. What the grooming gangs in the north of England have done is abhorrent. What has gone on in private schools for decades in this country is absolutely vile. There's no side in what I'm saying. And yet, for 50% of people listening, I'm on a side. It's just weird.
Yeah, I agree with that, but there's a difference in tone to how you are reporting the Brendan Cox thing to how you might have reported other things that might not be on your side, and that's just the way that the world is at the moment, I think. And you look at Jess Phillips, who I think has done brilliant things over the last few months in particular. I think that the fact that one of her first tweets was saying that this is a sign of a changed man, it's just in stark contrast to how she's responded to people who are on the other side of the political divide. And I think,
I think you're right actually. But again, if he had carried on denying it and insisting that it's all locker room talk and nothing ever happened and yada yada yada, if he'd behaved like the heroes of the racist right, then what would Jess Phillips have said then? What she's done is said it's got to be better to own up. To acknowledge allegations and accusations, to treat them publicly and openly, than it is to rely upon your supporters not caring enough to insist that you answer the allegations.
But I do think that we're conveniently forgetting that Brendan Cox has not admitted to the most awful bits of what he's been accused, and
but the heroes of the racists haven't admitted to anything.
Oh, I agree. I agree with that, and that's a worrying trend as well. Because actually, is it just the racists, or are we dividing those who might be centre-right into that kind of category? And
there's no one centre-right who's persuaded by Donald Trump, is there? You've got to be pretty extremist.
No, I completely agree. But let's take me as an example, someone that's voted Lib Dem and someone that's voted Tory, who disagrees with everything that Donald Trump stands for, and Roy Moore as well, but also disagrees with the way that he's portrayed in the media. I mean, in the media, we talk, or you talk a lot about how we've been objectifying women and objectifying men for their looks, and then it's disgusting, and quite rightly we say
when you say you,
let me link it back,
because I don't think men are objectified. I don't think it's possible really to objectify a man.
No, so I was trying to be balanced there. Right. Perhaps that was wrong. But then we're then very, very objectifying of Donald Trump and in terms of how he looks and his appearance, and I think there's a double standard there that people are confused by.
Really?
Do you not think? Well,
I don't think you do, Jack, to be honest. You think that judging women by the size of their boobs or the amount of cleavage they've got on display is in any way morally comparable to laughing at Donald Trump for being orange?
No, I think that is absolutely terrible when a woman is objectified in that way. But I also think that the double standards come in when we tend to forget
boasting about grabbing someone by the. Can I say that word on the radio? I don't know.
Hey, look, I don't mean to compare. Well,
you are comparing, my friend. That's exactly what you've rung in to do.
Sorry.
You just said the way we objectify Donald Trump is wrong, because people who say we shouldn't objectify women objectify Donald Trump. Going around grabbing women by their genitals is not the same as laughing at someone for having a ridiculous comb over.
No, you're quite right, but I think that it creates a divisive line.
Only if you really, really want to see one, mate, surely.
Do you think? Well, then...
You tell me what the similarities are, morally or behaviourally, between laughing at a ridiculous comb-over and grabbing a woman by her vagina.
No, there aren't similarities in that behaviour at all, but I think that there is a tone there where
So you want me to talk about comb-overs in the same tone that I talk about sexual assault?
No, I don't mean that.
Well, tell me what you mean then. I'll be quiet for a couple of minutes.
Perhaps I've gone down a rabbit hole and I shouldn't have.
Well, I think it's a rabbit hole that you are encouraged daily to jump down, and you have the honesty to admit that you didn't look what was down there before you jumped in it. You've bought into this idea that by being opposed to the objectification of women and laughing at Donald Trump for being ridiculous, you're somehow indulging in a double standard. You're really not. Donald Trump is ridiculous. Objectifying women is wrong.
Yeah, okay. You know what? I see that.
That's what I'm here for. I'll send you an invoice, all right? No, anytime. It's 10:56. Gary's in Manchester. Gary, what would you like to say?
As I was just saying to the girl on the phone, a lot of it is down to our proximity or what we feel our proximity is to either the offender or the victim. So psychologically, we are more attuned to people that are more like us, and that's just come from evolution. So when you look at the alternative that Donald Trump had, he spoke to a lot of people in Middle America that felt very similar to he did about immigration, and we have the same over here during Brexit. You know, we had people telling us that all the immigrants were bad. And for a lot of people who felt that, they spoke to somebody who was hearing the same things about them. We are more likely to be more lenient and more tolerant of people who are more like us and who have similar views to us than we are with people that don't.
What's wrong with me, then?
I don't know.
I seriously, I cannot in a million years imagine feeling more disgusted by a brown paedophile than I do by a white one.
Well, no, strictly speaking, you wouldn't. And again, it's more about how the media portrays it. You know, the media have portrayed Muslim gangs in the north of England, and they get, when you look at the column inches that they get compared to white paedophiles and white gangs, they don't get the same amount of column inches.
And then you'll see what you're doing, and you won't be accused of this because you're doing it from a slightly different perspective. But if I said that, I'd be accused of condescending and sneering. I'm saying these people are so sheep-like, they've been led by the nose by a rabble-rousing demagogic media. You think we're so stupid that we're only doing this because of what the Sun and the Daily Mail say, but that's what you've just said.
Yeah, well, effectively, it's true. Our opinions are formed by what we read.
I need a Manchester accent to insulate me from accusations of condescending, don't I? That's what it is.
Possibly, but that's what we are. That is exactly what we our opinions and our thoughts and our feelings are all formed on what we see and what we experience. And if we're not being told that there are gangs of white men or that there are, you know, we don't see my local police force constantly put notices on social media saying, you know, we're looking for this gentleman. He's failed to sign his sexual offences prevention order. He's failed to turn up. More often than not, it's an aged white man. Yeah,
and that's never going to make the paper.
But that doesn't make the paper. What makes the papers is large grooming gangs in the north of England.
But if it did, I mean, because look, you've seen the Barry Bennell story, and that's unbelievable in the scale of the abuse that he's suffered, and yet that'll be forgotten by the end of next week, except by the poor souls that he abused.
And again, that's because of a proximity is to us. You know, I'm a white bloke, so I'm not justifying what he's done.
No, but you don't pick a side if it's someone who looks like you.
Exactly. You're less likely to be offended and take a side if it's somebody who's close to you.
We're back to asking what's wrong with me. Just for the record, we've spoken before. You work in the field of child abuse, don't you?
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify that for people who haven't heard your voice before.